Hello and welcome to the channel. For this week's content, what I've done is I have recorded my session from the recent Global Power Platform Bootcamp. And so what I'm going to do is share that content with you here today on my channel. Now, in terms of what is included in this specific session, I do talk about a journey, an automation journey using the Power Platform itself. So as part of this journey, we're going to learn about Process Advisor and how we can use it to reduce bottlenecks, identify inefficiencies within our process, so that when we go to automate our specific use case, we're automating the right one. Naturally, if you automate a bad business process, you're just going to make a bigger problem worse faster. And so once we've got a solid business process in place, that's when we can go ahead and take advantage of Power Automate and some of the capabilities there. So we're going to focus on both cloud flows, but then also RPA and Power Automate desktop itself. Now, once you've automated a process, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's done. There's always future opportunities to optimize or enhance. And that's when we're going to extend our process using Power Virtual Agents, and we're going to add our chatbot to our overall solution itself. So the content's about an hour long. It's a mix of slides and demos. So go ahead, enjoy. Feel free to reach out if you've got questions in the chat. And likes and subscribes are always welcome. Thanks and enjoy. Before we dive deeper into the content, I wanted to let you know about an emerging community found at serverlessnotes.com. This is a community resource that covers best practices, tips, and latest announcements built on contributions by technology enthusiasts from around the globe. On serverlessnotes.com, you'll find content related to Power Automate, Azure Logic Apps, Azure Service Bus, Azure Functions, and much, much more. Serverlessnotes.com is brought to you by Serverless 360, a portal that is focused on operations and support for Microsoft Azure serverless resources. Now, this is a complementary tool to the Azure portal, and it helps organizations in supporting Azure serverless applications. You can find out more about Serverless 360 at serverless360.com. So automation opportunities are everywhere. We see it every day on social media, on LinkedIn, whether it's marketing or it's information from analysts. Everyone's talking about automation. We've got companies with large IPOs around the corner as well. Like, this area is extremely hot. And so what's really important to think about is how you can go ahead and improve the productivity of your organization through automation. Naturally, every company on the planet is going through some challenges right now, and typically it involves having to be able to do more with less, or even more with the same. And really, that's where automation comes in, to be able to help you focus on more meaningful work while still getting the other work done. It still has to be done, but to ensure that you're doing that in the most effective way possible. Now, here's a study from Gartner back in September of 2020. And what it calls out is that more than 25% of suitable tasks for automation will be automated by 2024. So this is both good news and bad news. The good news is, there's a lot of people that are going to be focusing on automation. It creates a lot of opportunities for you, whether you're an employee of an organization or you're a consultant. But what this also means is that there's still, what happened to the other 75%? And so this just goes to show you that there are a lot of opportunities in this space. And certainly from a Microsoft perspective, our goal is to be able to democratize who can go ahead and build these automation solutions. I have a saying that I like to use, and it goes something like this, where innovation doesn't happen while people are standing in line waiting for a small group of experts to service their needs. And really, that's the opportunity of the Power Platform, is to bring more people to that proverbial party in order to help scale. Scale's the next word that will be blatantly abused by way too many people, but it's true. If you want an organization to be able to get greater outcomes, greater results, it means you have to be doing more of the good stuff. And more of that good stuff means lowering that barrier of entry and giving more people the opportunity to go ahead and to participate in that success. The good news is you have the opportunity here to be a part of that. Now, with all of that said, there are a lot of things going on in this specific space. And it's really important to think about automation, you know, based upon sort of our current capabilities and current tools available for us. Unfortunately, there's some folks that are, change is difficult and they're very much set in their ways. And they always think that, okay, if I'm going to go do automation and especially RPA, I have to do it in a specific way. I have to always be recording those mouse clicks, recording those keystrokes, instead of being able to go ahead and say, hey, I want to go ahead and use a connector instead, because that's going to be more reliable and more performant way of going about solving that specific problem. The other thing I would also caution is that it's not always about, what we would typically consider an automation, whether it's, say, just a workflow, a cloud-based workflow, or some sort of automation script in order to solve that problem. We should really start thinking about the problem differently. An example that I've run into in the past is, a scenario where we have people that need to send emails and attach a spreadsheet at the end of the month. And that might be a scenario where, we'll go ahead and we'll submit those emails. We'll detach those attachments. We'll put them in this network folder, and then we'll have an RPA process that's going to go pick up those spreadsheets one by one, doing some sort of validation, and then basically aggregating that information, and then going ahead and just recording, inserting all of that information into a legacy ERP. But there's still a lot of friction involved in that process. Like, what if we just went ahead and created an app? What if we created a Power App and replaced those spreadsheets altogether? Now, it doesn't solve the need of getting that financial information into a downstream ERP. That's okay. That's where we can actually use automation and go ahead and automate all of that data from a Microsoft Dataverse store, and then go ahead and drive those screens. And we know that we're going to have valid data up front because we've got a rich experience in a Power App where we can provide that validation. Instead of a spreadsheet where it's kind of like fire and forget. If there's validation errors, then you have to go back and close the loop with that specific user that submitted that information. Right within a Power App, you can build those business rules in order to enforce that business logic and make sure that you are going to collect good information up front. One of the principles that I live by from an integration or automation perspective, which, really I've built my whole career on, is this idea of don't pollute downstream systems. And so where you can enforce good logic up front, you should go ahead and take advantage of that. And this really gets me to my next point, is using that right tool for the job, right? In the example I just gave you, it might mean using a Power App to basically capture that information. Now, but it also has to do with how do we think about connectors, how do we think about screen or desktop automation as well. And so the same thing, like we run into this a lot where we might have customers that are coming from an incumbent tool and they're used to having to use recorders for a lot of things. Like, so for example, even manipulating a SharePoint spreadsheet. But now with our ecosystem, we really have the best of both worlds where we can provide desktop automation, but we can also provide cloud-based connectivity as well and integrate or automate from that perspective as well. So when it comes to SharePoint, don't be recording those screens. Use our connector. Go ahead and retrieve that information, take advantage of OData filters, and take advantage of all the metadata that exists inside of our connectors to basically discover all of those attributes and make it very quickly to build some of those automation scenarios. Now, naturally, we're going to talk about this later. Use desktop automation where it makes sense. I'm not, by no means am I discouraging that, but really with our rich platform, use the right tool for the job. And we're going to see more of that here in the upcoming slides itself. And I'm sure you've all heard this, or you've all seen this specific joke in the past as well, but it does make sense, right? Like sometimes we do get so caught up in what we know and feel like that is always the way forward because it's less risky. But it is important to actually stop, pause, take a look up, and see what else is going on and see where there might be opportunities. So the fact that all of you folks are here and learning as part of this Global Bootcamp is a great sign that you're all willing to learn and always thinking about how can I improve my skills, how can I improve the outcomes of the projects I'm working on. That is the opportunity. So thanks for taking the time to spend it with us as well. But this is so important where, don't always get stuck in solving the problem using sort of the traditional way. There may be better ways to solve it. And really that's a core part of this talk here today. So naturally, when we think about automation, these are some of the core tools that are available to us inside of the Power Platform. Now, why do we have all of these arrows? Well, what these arrows really represent is how the platform can actually feed itself. And so what I mean by that is, I've been involved in a lot of customer engagements, in the last year or so. And what's super interesting is how when people originally engage us, they may be engaging us for only a part of the platform. They may be just focusing on just Power Automate. And then what they discover, and I call this like the light bulb moment, is like, hey, wait a minute. Like all of this stuff just works together. So back to the example about spreadsheets and a Power App. Well, hey, if I can actually use a Power App and use those same connectors and still leverage automation, but building new experiences on top of it, that actually is better than what I used to have. And that actually helps me retire some of these legacy applications that we've been using to front some of these automations as well. Another example is a chatbot, right? Some folks will start off with just a chatbot. No, we only need chatbots. And then they realize, hey, there's like this great integration story with Power Automate and our Power Virtual Agent. Now we can extend this to RPA as well. And so there's a cycle of people, regardless of what entry point they make, they always tend to say, hey, now I can solve that requirement using these tools. And naturally, Power BI is a great complement to all of these scenarios as well. Reporting is another form of automation. How so? Well, it allows you to develop insights with having to do a lot of like heavy lifting and basically looking at all of these disparate data sets. You can now aggregate that data, have a very clear view of the signals that represent your business process, and then act accordingly. So all of these tools do really complement each other quite well. Now, the Power Platform isn't complete without the core platform itself. So as part of that, we do have our data connectors, over 400 that exist today, and we have the ability to talk to our first-party services in Office 365 and Dynamics and Azure, but we also have the ability to call third-party connectors as well, and that could be related to third-party systems such as SaaS-based services like ServiceNow or Adobe. We also have the ability to create custom connectors and also connect to on-premises systems as well. Maybe it's SQL Server, maybe it's Oracle. We have the ability to use our on-premise data gateway to go ahead and bridge that connectivity. Now, next, we also have AI Builder. So much like we're trying to democratize app building, automation building, and chatbot building, we have the ability to democratize AI as well. And so this allows us to take advantage of forms processing, where we can go ahead and ingest samples of invoices or other PDF documents and then be able to scrape them in a very consistent manner and use that information downstream. And we're going to see that in a demo itself. Now, we also have a data platform. This slide's a little bit out of date. It is now called Microsoft Dataverse, but this gives us the ability to centralize and house our data. On top of it, it also gives us other benefits like a very rich security model and a solution packaging paradigm that allows us to combine all of these types of assets in a solution and then be able to promote them from one environment to another. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how we can empower our people to do more and drive more business value. And part of this I've touched on a little bit already, but it really comes down to how we can go ahead and democratize who can go ahead and build these automated processes out. And part of that comes from the whole strategy of providing a low-code platform that allows people that may not have a ton of prior technical experience to go ahead and build out some of these use cases. Now, before you roll your eyes, I do look at this very much from a spectrum perspective. There's going to be the simple side of the spectrum, and there's going to be a more complex side of the spectrum itself. And naturally, there's going to be needs across that entire spectrum for people to contribute. And there's going to be some use cases where you do need to get into an area where you're writing code and building out custom connectors and doing some of the more technical bits. But there's also going to be a lot of things that you can do without that by just using a drag and drop experience, using connectors in order to go ahead and to automate it. And I think what this really represents is using people's skill sets where they're most needed. There's no point, having someone that's very senior focusing on things that can be done by a lot of other people. And then on the flip side is I very much believe that as people get exposed to the platform if they're passionate about learning, they're going to upskill, they're going to grow skills, and quickly they're going to be able to build some very complex automation scenarios and really drive a lot of value for the organization itself. And so here's an updated slide. I know in the past there's been some mixed messaging about who is the Power Platform designed for, especially Power Automate. And what I would really focus on is it's available for everyone, right? And everyone has a place to roll, has a role to play within this whole ecosystem, regardless if you're a citizen developer, embedded within a business unit, you're a pro dev, or even an IT admin as well. So now what I want to focus on is a bit of an automation journey itself, right? And the whole point of this is to say, we get a requirement and we need to be able to say, okay, is this something that we can go ahead and automate? And what are the tools that are available to us that we can leverage in order to determine what that looks like? And it's really important, these first couple steps in the journey, to take them serious, because what you might end up doing is, hey, I know I can automate that, that's easy. And if you're thinking too much from a technical perspective, you're going to actually, make a bigger mess. And it's a situation where what you can do is, if you try to automate a bad business process, all you're going to do is make a bigger mess faster. And that's not going to drive the right level of results within the organization itself. So what can we do about this? So I'm going to talk a little bit about a new service or a new capability that's found inside of Power Automate called Process Advisor. It's going to help us rationalize our process across multiple stakeholders, multiple people that participate in that business process. And then what we're going to do is we're going to be able to identify or remove bottlenecks as a result. And then once we've been able to remove those bottlenecks and streamline our process, at that point, then we can reach out to our automated tools and actually build out that process in Power Automate Desktop. Then the next iteration of this is that we've got our process in place, we've got it automated, we're driving value. Now, how can we go ahead and enhance that experience? And enhancing that experience may come in the form of enhancing it for internal employees. It could be for customers, or in this case, it will be more about our partners itself. So now, what is Process Advisor? What you're seeing here is essentially the analytics for Process Advisor. This is the output. And what we're able to do is we're able to go ahead and use the recorder that's found in Power Automate Desktop, and we give that to people to go ahead and record the steps that they would typically take when they're going to go ahead and fulfill a specific use case. And what we're able to do once that is done is basically aggregate those results, run some analysis on top of it, and then generate these process maps, but then also some time analysis reports as well that helps us identify where our bottlenecks are and how can we go about improving them. And so how it works is you go ahead, you create a recording, you go ahead and record the steps, much like you would just perform the steps naturally. Then you have the ability to go ahead and annotate or edit the output of those steps. And you're going to do this for a couple of reasons. One, you want to group logically related activities, so that allows you to understand the buckets where you're spending your time, which will then help the analytics and help you determine where those bottlenecks are. On top of that, because you're recording a screen, there might be some PII, personal identifiable information, that you want to redact. And so, for example, if I'm typing in a customer's name as part of my script, I may have some obligations to, from say a GDPR perspective, to remove that. And so what I can do then is I can remove it up front and remove it and replace it with just like a static placeholder itself, so that we're not capturing that PII information into the logs. Once we've been able to analyze the recordings, then we're going to see the analytics basically being derived on the output side of things. And this is something that you can do quite easily, quite quickly, in order to go ahead and get it working inside of your organization. So with that said, what we're going to do is let's just go ahead and skip a few slides in the interest of time and get into a demo just to make this real. Okay, so I am now in Power Automate, the Maker portal. And on the left-hand side here, we're going to discover there's an area called Process Advisor. Now, as part of this Process Advisor, I have a series of recordings that have already been performed. And what I'm going to be able to do now is I'm going to be able to go ahead and add my own recording. And once I've been able to add my recording, it can then be analyzed with the rest of these recordings, and we'll be able to go ahead and generate basically some analysis or some insights. So to add a recording, I can go ahead and click new recording. In this case, our scenario is going to be about invoice processing. So to give you a little bit more background before I get into this, what we're going to do is we are going to record an existing process that involves a contractor or a vendor doing some work for our company. Then they go ahead and they submit an invoice. And that invoice is typically an attachment, such as a PDF document, that will get sent to a centralized mailbox. From there, we'll go ahead and manually open the email, manually go ahead and open the attachment, and then we're going to go ahead and copy and paste information from that document into our legacy invoicing application. Once we've processed that invoice, we would manually go ahead and send them an email back saying that their invoice has been processed. And so what we're going to do is we're going to record at least a section of that overall process just in the interest of time. And I will show you how you go about doing that. As mentioned before, we're going to use the recorder that comes with Power Automate Desktop itself in order to record these specific steps. So I've already installed all of those components. I'm going to now just go ahead and open up the recorder. Okay, our recorder is now open, and then I'm going to go ahead and open up our invoicing application. And now we have the ability to go ahead and to start recording our steps. So we'll click on Start Recording. And now everything that I do in this app is actually going to get recorded, and we're going to see that showing up. So the first thing I need to do is click on Invoices, and so we can see that this has now been updated. Then what I'm going to do is go ahead and click on the new record. I'm then going to click into Account, and I'm going to type the account. Then I'm going to go ahead and click into Contact, and I am going to go ahead and provide our contact information. I'll then provide an amount. And then I'm going to go ahead and flip the status to paid. I will then go ahead and be able to save my record, and I will close my recording itself. And so that's going to now go ahead and save back up into the cloud. So now when I head back over to my recording, what we can go ahead and see is that we've got a new recording that's been added, and it hasn't been analyzed just yet. Now, before we go ahead and analyze this, we do need to go ahead and go through that process of removing any sensitive information. Now, we also need to go ahead and add those activities which represent our sort of buckets and how we want to logically relate different groups. Now, here's an example of where we do have some personal identifiable information, right? This has no bearing in terms of what our outcome is going to be, any of our reporting. So what I can just go ahead and just even remove this and just call it email address, just so we know the type of information that's provided. And the same thing, if we went and we needed to go ahead and to delete screenshots, we would have the ability to do so. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an activity. So I'm going to go select this first record, and because I've already have a process that's in place, I've got all of these different activities already created. I could go ahead and add my own if I wanted to, but in this case, this is going to be related to opening the Contoso app itself. Now, the next thing we're going to want to do is we want to add an activity that's going to represent filling out our invoice form. And we would go ahead and continue this with the remaining items as well. I'm just going to stop there for now. When I am done logically relating all of these different activities together, I can go ahead and click on Ready to Analyze, and then go ahead and click Close. Now, the next step in the process is we would go ahead and analyze all of these records. We can go ahead and do so by clicking on Analyze right here. That'll take a few minutes, and the output will be these analytics that are available to us. Now, what does this represent here? This is our process map. It represents all of the different variants that have been taken place when people have gone ahead and completed this process. Now, we see everyone is always opening up the Contoso invoicing app, so that step's consistent. But this is where we start to see some deviation of the process. We've got some people opening the invoice document. We have some people opening an email attachment. Then they're creating a new invoice. Then they're filling out the invoice form, versus some people that are going directly to filling out the invoice form itself. So in order for us to go ahead and to automate this process, we want to basically standardize it first. Now, you have the ability to choose how you want to best standardize it. Maybe it's by, the variance where you've got the most frequency. So this is where people are doing it in a consistent manner, right? So here's an example of the most popular way of doing this. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the right way of doing it, but you at least have the ability to go ahead and slice and dice from that specific manner. Now, if we head over to the time analysis report, we're going to get more insights about the timing, right? So how long, on average, does each of these steps take? So, opening the invoice from an email attachment takes 37 seconds. Filling out the form is 33 seconds. And then we can also take a look at that based on median time as well. And then on top of that, we also have because we know who's providing these recordings, we can also take a look to see who is taking the longest, who is, taking the shortest amount of time. Now, once again, this isn't so much about shaming someone, because you might find that the person that's taking the longest is completing all of the steps. But it does give you some insights from that perspective. Naturally, in a Power BI embedded experience, you do have the ability to filter. So we can go ahead and filter based upon specific recordings that have been provided and gain more insights from that perspective. So at this point, we've been able to identify the variance of our processes, how long it is taking, and then being able to figure out, what is the best path forward? And I'll show you that in an upcoming slide itself. But this becomes really important when you think about how do we go about building out automation use cases and ensuring that we're automating the right things. I think we've all been there where a big meeting is called and everyone's sitting around the table or on a Teams call these days. And there's always some differences of opinion as it pertains to the business process. Well, no, we do it this way. No, we do it that way. But this allows you to be more focused on what actually happens. And yeah, you can go ahead and draw all of this out in Visio, but that takes a lot of time. Whereas this is something that's being derived automatically for you just through the use of recording steps and then being able to go ahead and run some analysis jobs. So Process Advisor is currently in public preview. It was originally launched back in December with the GA of Power Automate Desktop. I would look for a GA announcement sometime in the spring with respect to the tool, but you can go ahead and try it out today. There are no charges to use it while it's in preview itself. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about Power Automate now. And naturally with Power Automate, one of our strengths is our connector library. We're now up to over 400 different connectors that exist. It feels like this is being changed every week. We've got Microsoft first-party connectors being deployed, but we also have third parties that are continuing to build on top of our platform as well. Naturally, one of our strengths related to connectors is just the support for the Microsoft ecosystem itself. So Microsoft 365 is just taking off like gangbusters. It's one of those things where, it's hard to run into an organization that isn't using Microsoft 365. And so as a result, we've got a lot of support for building automations with respect to Teams and SharePoint and just Office 365 in general. And this is oftentimes a key enabler for organizations, is this deep, rich integration that we do provide. Now, not to say we only focus on the Microsoft ecosystem. We do have capabilities when it comes to automating scenarios that include some of our competitors, whether that be Salesforce, SAP. Naturally, we continue to build robust experiences around Dynamics 365 as well. We chatted a little bit about AI Builder before, but the core goal with AI Builder is democratizing AI. And this is where we're able to stand on the shoulders of giants. Microsoft has invested a lot of money in artificial intelligence, whether that comes from Azure, whether that comes from Microsoft Research. And really what we're able to do is take a lot of those investments and to build abstractions on top of some of those more complex scenarios, and then go ahead and democratize who can go build those out. So a popular use case is having forms. You've got PDF documents that are being sent into the organization through email. How can you go ahead and process those documents, extract key pieces of information, and then use those downstream in your automations themselves? So let's talk a little bit about RPA now, robotic process automation. And this is probably one of the most important slides of the whole deck. And so what I've talked a lot about so far is just, our connectors and our modern automation capabilities, API-led connectivity. But when it comes to RPA, there is this reality that there's going to be some applications that could be old, that could be legacy, where APIs aren't provided, and we don't have the ability to use connectors. And so those are going to be natural examples of where you would want to go ahead and use desktop automation and use tips and techniques like recording screens and using mouse clicks and determining specific XY locations on a form to go ahead and click a button. There might be scenarios where there are APIs, but you just don't have access to them. Anyways, it could be a partner hosted, say, web application where they don't give you or they don't expose the underlying APIs that could be used in order to both create data in that system or extract data as well. It could be another scenario is SAP. SAP has rich experience for integration through their BAPIs, their RFCs, their iDocs, also their web services, their OData services. But you may have some admins that aren't super pumped to go ahead and expose all of that functionality to a citizen developer group. And in that case, it also might make sense to go ahead and automate through the front end because you can't access the back end. And so the whole core point of this slide is that use the right tool for the job. And what we're able to do is provide a holistic experience that allows you to tap into either one end of the spectrum and actually create a hybrid where you can go ahead and use those connectors where it makes sense, and where it doesn't make sense, you can go ahead and use screen recording or desktop automation. And so that's typically how that works. You go ahead and you record the tasks, much like we saw in the Process Advisor example. Then what we can do is basically substitute that hard-coded text that you had previously provided and use inputs and outputs in order to push variables into that script, let them run, and then basically return the outputs back out to the cloud. Cloud orchestration is a core part of our strategy. All of our automation starts from the cloud. It all starts in Power Automate Cloud Flows, and then we can go ahead and create these mashups by using connectors, by using desktop automations in order to go ahead and to solve the overall automation problem itself. Now let's talk a little bit about Power Automate Desktop. Now Microsoft got into RPA essentially last year in 2020. Well, I guess it was probably even before 2019 with some of the preview capabilities that were released. But we did launch UI Flows back in last April, and they reached general availability at that point in time. Then what happened is Microsoft acquired Softomotive back in the spring of 2020. They had a tool called Win Automation, which was a desktop automation tool used by a lot of customers. And so they had a lot of experience with desktop automation. And what's happened since then has been really exciting and really encouraging, how the Softomotive team has joined Microsoft. And essentially what's happened with that tool, Win Automation, is it has been evolved into Power Automate Desktop, where we've got a rich integrated experience between our cloud flows and this desktop automation itself. And so this allows us to go ahead and author with ease using the recorder that we saw before. We've got capabilities around enhanced error handling, and then this ability to both integrate across these different ecosystems, whether it's desktop automation or cloud-based SaaS automation itself. Here's some of the capabilities that were introduced to Microsoft as a result of that Softomotive acquisition. Support for Java, Citrix, I would call it more advanced automation capabilities with SAP, the ability to go ahead and automate those green screens like AS400, and additional support for web browsers as well. The authoring experience is quite easy. We do have a desktop install, kind of like Power BI Desktop. We now have Power Automate Desktop for building these desktop automations. And we can go ahead and drag and drop actions onto our canvas and then go ahead and provide local debugging experience on top of that as well. Here's just another example of how we can go ahead and build out some of those experiences. On top of this, we also have support for calling scripting scripts. So things like VB script, Python, JavaScript, PowerShell, those now can be orchestrated with Power Automate. I don't know how many times I've been asked, how can I go ahead and automate PowerShell with Power Automate Cloud Flows? Usually it involves doing something with an Azure function, having to write code, probably creating some sort of VPN connection because you need to be able to run this against your local assets. But now this is much easier. Orchestrate PowerShell using Power Automate and Power Automate Desktop. What's also really nice, and this was occurred as a result of our GA announcement back in December of Power Automate Desktop, is the integration of our logs. So you're not going to have to worry about collecting logs from a local device in order to see if it executed properly. All of those logs get synced back up to the cloud, where we can go ahead and start from our cloud flow and go through our debugging steps, and then being able to easily jump over into the desktop automation. Once again, seeing per action level debug telemetry, including inputs and outputs. So that makes debugging a specific use case or an instance of that use case quite easy because all of that data is available to you. Now, here's an example of how we go ahead and basically integrate Power Automate Desktop with our Cloud Flows itself. So you always start in Cloud Flows. I've mentioned that as part of our cloud orchestration strategy. You can use any of the existing triggers that you use today, whether those are based upon a data event, whether they're based upon a schedule, or even a manual button click. Once we've done that, we now can go ahead and use connectors and actions. And all of our Power Automate Desktop flows will be available within the same environment. And when we go ahead and add the run of flow built by Power Automate Desktop action, we will be able to iterate all of those different desktop flows that we have access to. We can go ahead and select it and then choose the mode. And the mode can be attended or unattended, depending upon your needs. And then we'll be able to go ahead, call out to that, pass context to the desktop agent. It'll run the script. It'll then return context and any outputs back up to our cloud flow. And much like you would expect, we can use those outputs downstream in any subsequent action. So if you already have experience with Power Automate Cloud Flows, integrating Power Automate Desktop Flows will be easy peasy for you. Okay, so let's just update our automation journey here. We've gone through the Process Advisor stage. We now know that we want to be able to go ahead and build that automated process using Power Automate Desktop and our Cloud Flows. And then in a little bit, we'll talk about Power Virtual Agents. So this is essentially the process that we've landed on. Our contractor will continue to email their invoice into an inbox. From there, we will have a cloud flow that's monitoring that inbox, being able to retrieve that attachment, pass it to AI Builder, where we'll be able to get just the values we're interested in. We'll send them off to Microsoft Teams, where our project manager will go ahead and approve the expense. This is also known as human in the loop, right? So we're getting a human that's participating as part of this automated process. Provided they approve, we'll then go ahead and drive a UI, which happens to be that legacy invoicing system that we saw before. And then we'll go ahead and close the loop by sending back the outcome to the contractor itself. So let's go ahead and let's jump into a demo to show this in more detail. Okay, so let's walk through the cloud flow first, and then we'll run it, and then I'll show you more details about how that was constructed. So what we're going to do is we're going to use our cloud flow. We're going to use the Outlook connector. We're going to look for any emails that have this subject, and then we're also going to want to include those attachments. Then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and use the AI Builder connector and call the predict action, which will allow us to go ahead and pass our invoice into an existing model that we've gone ahead and trained by using some sample documents. We use sample documents. We then go ahead and determine what are the fields that we're interested in. save, publish that model, and then we can go ahead and call it from a connector. Now, here what I've done is I've got a bit of an audit step. This is going to be useful when we go ahead and call this from our chatbot. But the whole idea is what we're going to do is basically just record the fact that we've received a contract from a specific partner, and that will help us go ahead and give them status updates through the chatbot itself. Now what we're going to go ahead and do is we'll post an adaptive card to a Teams user, that project manager, and include the details of the invoice itself without having to show the invoice. They'll be able to take a look at who it's from and the amount, and provided they're good with that, we will go ahead and drive that Power Automate desktop flow. And I'll show you that in a little bit here. Now, as part of that Power Automate desktop flow, we go ahead and establish 3 different inputs. When we establish those inputs, then what happens is they get exposed automatically, and we have the ability to pass dynamic content into them, much like you would expect with anything related to a cloud flow itself. Once we've gone ahead and driven that UI automation and it's successful, we'll go ahead and update our audit log, which will help with our chatbot. Then we'll go ahead and send an email back to our requester indicating that their invoice has been approved. Now, in the event our project manager rejects their request, we'll once again update the audit log, and then we'll send them an email indicating that it was rejected. So what we're going to do is we're going to send in this invoice, and I will show it to you once it actually has been sent. Okay, so that's been sent. It'll take a couple minutes to process. It gets scanned for viruses, etc. And as part of this invoice, there's going to be a few different values we're interested in. The bill to, that's essentially our account. The contact, that is going to be essentially the person that's sending this in. Naturally, the balance due. And then also this invoice is going to be important for us, especially from a chatbot perspective when we want to be able to look up the status of it. So that has been processed, and it looks like we now have a message inside of Teams. And in this case, we have all of that information we just spoke about, and we can go ahead and click approve. When we go ahead and click approve and then confirm, at this point, what's going to happen is we're going to pass context over to Power Automate Desktop, and Power Automate Desktop will go ahead and launch and drive our UI automation. Okay, so now you can see that we've opened up our legacy app, we've passed in those inputs, and we've gone ahead and closed that out. And if we head over to our inbox, we can go ahead and see that an email has been sent that the contractor will receive and indicate that their invoice request has been approved, which is great to see. Now, if we head over to our Power Automate Desktop, we can go ahead and take a quick look at what this script looks like. Now, to generate this script, I would have used the desktop recorder, much like I did with Process Advisor. It would have recorded all of those interactions in the application. I would have had hard-coded text when I recorded it for the first time. Then what I can go ahead and do is create inputs, that represent our account, amount, and contact. I then go ahead and replace the hard-coded text with our input variable here. And then I can also go ahead and capture the output as well. There was a specific ID that I have the ability to go ahead and retrieve as well. I can go ahead and run this locally and use some default values as I'm going through my default experience. When I'm done, I go ahead, I hit save. It gets pushed up to the same environment that I was previously working on, and everything becomes integrated from that perspective. Okay, so that helps us address step 2 of our journey. Now what we're going to do is we're going to be able to enhance the experience of that overall solution. Now, wouldn't it be great if you were the contractor, if you could go ahead and talk to a chatbot to get more information about the payment terms of this specific organization, but also be able to see what is the current status of the invoice, just to get a sense of where it might be in the overall process itself. And so that's what we're going to do is we're going to introduce Power Virtual Agents, our conversational chatbot experience that will allow our partner to go ahead and to get that type of information. Now, Power Virtual Agents aligns really well with the overall strategy of the Power Platform. And that's how can you democratize who can go ahead and build out these chat-based solutions. In the past, you would have needed to write a lot of code in order to do that. But what we're going to see here today is we can go ahead and use a low-code, no-code approach in order to go ahead and build these solutions. Now, it also allows people like subject matter experts to focus on delivering good content and then allow technical folks to handle some of the more technical requirements that could involve how you would integrate this with other systems using Power Automate or other extensibility features like Bot Framework Composer itself. Now, when we think about challenges that exist with chatbots today, we often find that people are looking for self-service experiences instead of contacting an agent for assistance. We've all been there. Being on hold is not fun, right? You're like, what is really going on? If there's things that you can go ahead and address using a self-service manner, everyone is happy. Once again, we talk about scale. We talked about this earlier in the presentation. Organizations are looking to do more. They want to be able to scale. So naturally, people are going to be part of that solution. There's no doubt about it. But you want to make sure that those people are being used to solve the more challenging problems, not to determine things that can be easily looked up by essentially a chatbot or an automation itself. There's another expectation that customers have, and that's how can I go ahead and contact an organization and ensure that I have a consistent experience regardless of the channel that I go ahead and choose. I think I've always been dumbfounded sometimes when I will call, a specific organization looking for help and they're like, oh, I don't have access to that system. So-and-so, this group only has access. And it's like, why? And, I'm sure part of it has to do with like the internal bureaucracies that exist with accessing that sort of data. But if you can now build out experiences that can easily integrate with those systems, then why not? And really that's the goal of Power Virtual Agents itself. The other thing that you will find is that these different channels can be managed in silos. Oh no, the social team only does this. And it's like, oh, you have to go talk to this team. Like that is the most frustrating experience ever. And if you can go ahead and reduce that friction through chatbots, you're going to be much further ahead. Much like a lot of the Power Platform, we are standing on the shoulders of giants when it comes to Power Virtual Agents. And there's a few different layers here that goes into being able to provide the service that exists today. So it all starts with AI, right? So Microsoft has invested a lot of money through Microsoft Research and even Azure in AI and how that can go ahead and be democratized. So we do have capabilities like natural language understanding and Azure Cognitive Services that are building blocks in our PVA solution itself. Then the next level up in terms of like our communication channels, we are very much leaning on the bot framework to allow for that to take place. And then the next layer up is we've got the Power Platform. So we've got things like Microsoft Dataverse, the ability to go ahead and use that data platform to number one, store and retrieve data, but also we get a lot of things as part of that ecosystem like granular access control, RBAC. We also have the ability to use solutions to package all of these together. And then also environments, right? That's another construct that's available to us that allows our chatbot to be seen by other tools, Power Platform tools in that same environment, such as a Power Automate flow itself. Now, another big capability that's highlighted here on the screen is all of those different connectors. And so we can access these connectors through a Power Automate cloud flow that the integration is, couldn't be easier from that perspective. So if we want to go ahead and transact with, say, like a ServiceNow, we can go ahead and do so. Because naturally with chatbots, once again, there's a spectrum, we've talked about that a lot today, is there's going to be some things that are quite simple, like FAQs, frequently asked questions that you want to expose through a chatbot. And that's great, and that's a great place to start. But where you're going to find even more value is where you can go ahead and automate a request that an end user, customer, or partner has. If you can go transact on behalf of them, you're going to get even more value from your chatbot. These connectors are going to allow us to do so. The other thing we've talked a lot about is this whole democratization and this spectrum, this complexity spectrum. And PVA does a great job of enabling development as a team sport. And what we'll often see is that customers will have an IT group or a pro dev group that's often involved in setting up a lot of the chatbot, all of the sort of the environments, the DLP policies, any extensibility needs, integration, third-party connectors, gateways, things of that nature. But you've got subject matter experts, such as like a customer support department, that knows the questions that customers are going to have. They know the language they use. They know the language that they want to be responded to. And really giving those people the ability to focus on content by using an easy to use drag and drop configurable like conversation editor is what helps you build chatbots faster. We've had customers take chatbots to production in less than 2 weeks. And they're able to do that by truly creating partnerships in order to focus on the right people working on the right things and getting more people in the mix in order to turn around that solution quite quickly. Now, in the interest of time, I probably won't go through this in a whole lot of details, but the core piece here is when you have a chatbot, it's not a scenario where there's a project has a start date and an end date. The whole idea is with chatbots is you want to be learning from your customers. You want to understand what are the things they're looking for so that you can go ahead and incorporate them in the chatbot. If you put a chatbot out there and it's like, okay, it's live, we're done now, you're going to be missing out on opportunities. You want to look at the signals that you're going to find inside of your analytics and then use those signals to drive further prioritization of content and features that people are looking for so that they can get the most value from your chatbot. Now, in terms of our journey, we've gone ahead, we've automated our process, but now how can we enhance that experience? And in this case, what we want to do is we want to ensure that our partner, in this case, can go ahead and look up the status of their invoice at any point of their journey. And that's what we're going to focus on here through a demo. Okay, so we're now in the Power Virtual Agents Maker portal. And here is where we go ahead and define all of our topics. These are essentially dialogues that we have with customers. You could kind of think of it as creating a workflow, and you're modeling a conversation inside of this experience itself. Now, we also have this powerful routing engine that exists, and this essentially is that natural language understanding capability that allows us to detect the essentially the intents or the utterances of our customer or our user, and then direct it to the right topic to engage in the right conversation. So what we're going to do here, just as a starting point, is, it's quite typical for someone to walk up to a bot and just say hi. And then as a result, we're going to kick off this system greeting. So this is provided out of the box. And then what I've done is I've extended this specific dialogue to ask a couple questions. I want to know who I am talking to on the other end of this chatbot so that I can service them better. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to request for the email address, and then I'm also going to request the partner ID. When I go ahead and do so, I can go ahead now and call out to a Power Automate flow that is going to go ahead and validate this information. As we can see that we've been able to return the user-friendly name, and we can include that in a more personalized message itself. Now we've got two options here. We've got our payment status and we've got payment terms. And what we see here, this is essentially a Bot Framework Composer thumbnail card. And so what we've been able to do is integrate with Bot Framework Composer in order to provide a richer experience for our end users. This is essentially a hello world type example, but it does prove that we have the ability to provide a rich experience. Now in this case, I want to go ahead and I want to go and retrieve the payment status for an invoice that I've gone ahead and received. Naturally, we need to make sure that we've gone ahead and done so. So let's just go ahead and see that information just so we have a more meaningful demo itself. Okay, so that's now been sent. what we should see is that we'll have a record inside of our Microsoft Dataverse instance that will say pending approval. So what we can go ahead and do is click on payment status, and this is going to route us to another topic. This is going to be essentially our payment get invoice status topic itself. And here we've got a trigger phrase of payment status. And what we're going to now do is we're going to ask for the invoice ID, and we're also going to pass the partner ID into this flow to be able to determine the status. But notice I'm not being prompted for the partner ID because I've already provided it. And what I've done is I've declared that as a global variable so that I don't have to go ahead and ask for it again because I already know it as part of our chatbot conversation itself. So here we go. We can see that our invoice is in a pending approval state. And then so, okay, well, I wonder how long it will take for me to go ahead and receive payment. So now I'm going to go ahead and reach out to another topic. And this topic will be able to provide me payment terms. And in this case, I'm being asked, how much is the amount of the invoice? Well, it's less than 50K. And now as a result, I see that it's subject to 30 days. So within 30 days, I will now be able to go ahead and expect payment from that perspective. But to close the loop on this, let's just go ahead. Now, our project manager has received that request. We'll go ahead, we'll confirm it. We'll kick off this RPA process once again, and it will go ahead and drive that GUI for us, that UI, and be able to process that invoice itself. Now that's running, we're going to go ahead and enter all of that information, indicate that it's now been paid. And what this allows us to do is we can go back over to our chatbot and go ahead and enter payment status, provide the invoice, and we should now see that it has been approved. And so once again, this is taking a chatbot experience, providing real value. We've addressed both an FAQ in terms of what are the payment terms that I can typically expect. But on top of that, I've been able to transact on behalf of that user and actually tap into other systems as well, which is great. It allows me as a partner in this case to know real-time information about where I'm at within this company's business process itself. And so you probably can imagine a million other ways that you could use this type of experience to actually build on top of automation. And this is why it's so important not to think in just traditional ways of automation. We have a lot of great tools and capabilities that allow us to evolve and actually provide even better experiences. And sort of back to that thumbnail of the caveman, no, we've always done it this way. I would encourage you to challenge yourself and think about new ways using this technology to drive even better experiences for your customers. Hopefully you enjoyed that end-to-end demo and that gave you some ideas on how you can go and modernize your automated scenarios and really drive more value for your stakeholders itself. Now, in terms of call to action, I do have some follow-up material here that you can use. The scenario that I did walk you through with Process Advisor and Power Automate Desktop is all part of our RPA in a Day package. So I would encourage you to go ahead and check out RPA in a Day. You can download that. I include that sample application and all of the instructions step by step on how you can go ahead and build out a similar use case. If you're interested in PVA, I do have PVA in a Day link here. It's not the exact scenario that we talked about, but a lot of the same capabilities are demonstrated in that training itself. The ability to go ahead and retrieve information from Microsoft Dataverse or CDS is all in there. In terms of additional content, the team that I'm part of, PowerCat, we do have regular content on the Power Platform YouTube channel. So we've got content focused on RPA called Automate It, and then we also have content focused on PVA called Build a Bot. So go ahead, check that out. We typically focus on enterprise use cases, so if that's your area, you should find some good information there. And then lastly, go ahead, follow me on Twitter. You can add me on LinkedIn, no worries. Just tell me that you watched my session, that would be great. And then on top of that, I do have a YouTube channel. Go ahead and check that content out. I publish weekly. I focus on Power Automate and Power Virtual Agents. So I think my time is up here, but thanks all for joining me here today. And take care and enjoy the rest of the event.